The vision for Nature Glenelg Trust is a healthy lot of wetlands which the community are actively involved in.
Since European settlement, we've lost probably 50 or 60% of our wetlands. So every wetland that is left is really important for a lot of our flora and fauna, particularly a lot of our threatened flora and fauna which are heavily dependent on wetlands.
This area in particular is amazing. It's over 13 square kilometres of wetland. A whole suite of our migratory birds through to local wetland birds are in a situation now where their populations have got so low that we're at a high risk of losing them. So we need to restore these wetland areas.
I think the prognosis for wetlands in the southwest of Victoria in the face of climate change is not very encouraging. If we continue the way we're going, in other words draining wetlands, the situation with declining rainfall is going to make things fairly grim for water birds. And so therefore we need, wherever possible, to restore wetlands on private land where the landholders are actually willing to do that. And many of them are going to need help to do that. And I think we should be providing that assistance.
Where we are is overlooking the Brady swamp, but all this area to the north is part of what's known as the Wannon fan. And it was probably the best fed wetland in Western Victoria. Over a period of time it's been drained for farming purposes, and that's happened in the last 120 years. But now we've blocked up some of those drains, or the Glenelg Nature Trust and the CMA have acted to block up some of those drains, and we're starting to see the wetland come back again. The water stays around a lot longer and more birds can stay there and breed. One year we had, I think, around 3,500 nesting pairs of ibis, which of course come out on the farms and eat the crickets and the pests. So the wetland actually helps the whole farming biology, I suppose, in that regard, with the breeding of these birds. Having a wetland is certainly not a disadvantage, it's more of an advantage in that regard.
Nature Glenelg Trust, we're a non-government organisation, and I guess over the 6-7 years we've been operating, a really important part of what we do has been working in collaboration and partnership with Glenelg Hopkins CMA. Well, Glenelg Hopkins CMA are a major provider of funding for wetland restoration and protection initiatives across the region. That's been really integral to a lot of the things we've been able to deliver. So the story for Walker Swamp goes back to 2013 on the back of restoration trials carried out at Gooseneck Swamp and Brady Swamp, which are just down the drainage line. Talking with the current managers of the property here at the time and recognising that there was capacity to do some wetland restoration on their property, we undertook a trial program here, putting some sandbags in, and had some really good results with where the water was sitting and some of the response of the vegetation and the animals. Following on from that, there was always a hope that we might be able to achieve something permanent. The property was eventually sold about 12 months ago, and we were able to negotiate to purchase that property. And part of that was working with major sponsors and supporters like Glenelg Hopkins CMA and the Hamilton Field Naturalists Club to be able to get enough money to actually purchase that property. And subsequent to that, we also ran a public campaign and received a really incredible amount of donations to help us secure a second part of the block as well. So now we're looking at 1,000 acres of wetland and terrestrial vegetation area adjacent to the Grampians National Park, which can be managed for restoration and protected permanently.
In taking back 150 years of management for other purposes and removing that legacy, the grazing across the landscape and then the impact of the blue gums, we've needed a lot of funding, and we've been able to get a range of grants, and they have enabled us to come in and do the mapping, the removal of the impacts of the blue gums, and then to develop the hydrological models that we needed, and in turn will fund the infrastructure development that we need to go through to restore the wetlands.
I would regard the whole project that Nature Glenelg Trust has organised with Glenelg Hopkins CMA as very sound. both groups go out of their way to try and get on with everyone, including the landholders, which is pretty important.
The birds and the life in it and the sound of it is fantastic. I can lie in bed at night from the house 3 kilometres away and on a still night and hear the frogs from home. Most of the farmers around here are a bit like that. They are interested in the birds and the animals, and consequently if you've got an environment that encourages them, that's part of the things that keeps us sane.
This particular wetland behind me, Walker's Swamp, is a really important site for the western swamp crayfish, which is a really small crustacean. It's got a very limited range around the Grampians across to the border with South Australia, and with our proposal to put a bit more water in this wetland will mean that it gets wetter more often, so the chance for that species to hold on is a lot higher. I've also got the growling grass frog, which is a rare nationally listed frog species which is present here as well in really good numbers. So our capacity to manage these systems and return them to some sort of natural hydrological regime means that the water's going to stay there for a bit longer, and any opportunity we get to extend water into the summer months means that a lot of our birds and amphibian species have a greater potential to breed and recruit, so that their young can actually survive to a stage where they'll be able to persist when the wetlands dry out.
If people are aware of the spectacular place this is, the amazing animals that it holds, they really start to have an ownership of the area.
So the total complex there, I think, will be one of the best wetland areas in this part of Victoria.